What the Buddha Taught by Walpola Rahula. Chapter 1. The Buddhist Attitude of Mind. We're going to read this in order instead of the preferred order of the author. Among the founders of religions, the Buddha, if you're permitted to call him the founder of a religion in the popular sense of the term, was the only teacher who did not claim to be other than a human being, pure and simple. And they mixed the story of a few individuals into what we call the Buddha. And yeah, I'll shave my head better when I go out to get a razor. But we can say that Buddhism wasn't founded by the Buddha. It was founded when they formed the three baskets. The council. Confucianism was founded by who we call Mencius. Paul was the founder of Christianity, even if he was reworking other stuff. Judaism was not founded until after the prophets that condemned the Kahanim were dead. Ibadi, Shia, Sunni, Sufi, and other groups were not the people who knew Muhammad. So Muhammad was long dead before these groups actually made their appearance. And it goes on and on. Zoroastrianism, so many other groups, these were not founded by the so-called people. But Buddha, you can say, okay, so it's a philosophical school in its roots. So in that sense, you could say, okay, maybe it wasn't, but there was a long tradition of prophet-like figures that Buddhism kind of branches into. Gautama not being the first, that maybe we'll get into that. Other teachers were either God or his incarnations in different forms or inspired by him. Okay, so see, that in that sense, they're not referring to him as a prophetic figure. So therefore, it's not like founding a religion, it's like founding a school of thought. The Buddha was not only a human being. There's a few incidences where you think, a few offlines in places where you think, not only was he probably a monotheist, which was unusual for his time and place, but that he could have had experience. But he wasn't claiming to be a deva or incarnation or various other things. The Buddha was not only a human being, he claimed no inspiration from any god or external power either. He attributed all his realization, attainments, achievements to human endeavor and human intelligence. A man, and only a man, can become a Buddha. Every man has within himself the potential of becoming a Buddha, if he so wills and endeavors. We call the Buddha a man par excellence. He was so perfect in his humanness that he came to be regarded in later popular religion almost as superhuman. And, the ones who are inspired, the ones who do receive the revelation, there are examples of, hey, this is stuff you can do, instead of, well, maybe their whole package, you can't live up to their you can't have such a legacy for yourself. But the actual deeds themselves, yeah, people can do them. People can even do better than some of these things. I mean, more grand. Man's position, according to Buddhism, is supreme. Man is his own master, and there is no higher being or power that sits in judgment over his destiny. Well, even if you say there's a final judgment, you're going to realize all that self-delusion and all that other stuff, not taking control of yourself. No, you were supposed to master yourself. And one is one's own refuge. Who else could be the refuge? Said the Buddha. He admonished his disciples to be a refuge to themselves and never to seek refuge in or help from anybody else. He taught, encouraged, and stimulated each person to develop himself and to work out his own emancipation, for man has the power to liberate himself from all bondage through his own personal effort and intelligence. The Buddha says, you should do your work, for the Tathagatas only teach the way. If the Buddha is to be called a savior at all, it is only in the sense that he discovered and showed the path to liberation, nirvana, but we must tread the path ourselves. And Tathagata means one who has come to the truth, one who has discovered the truth. This term is generally used by the Buddha referring to himself and to the Buddhas in general. And that word sounds similar to the path, to the bridge builders of the Jains, which Jainism proper was only the last couple. So just like Buddhism, Jainism also seemed to have arisen out of another tradition, which is closer to what may be called religion. But the founders of a new group, were the last ones, are people talking about the last ones. It is on this principle of individual responsibility that the Buddha allows freedom to his disciples. In the Maha Parinibbana Sutta, the Buddha says that he never thought of controlling the Sangha, order of monks, nor did he want the Sangha to depend on him. He said that there was no esoteric doctrine in his teaching, nothing hidden in the closed fist of the teacher. Acharya Buddha, or to put it in other words, there was never anything up his sleeve. The freedom of thought allowed by the Buddha is unheard of elsewhere in the history of religions. This freedom is necessary because, according to the Buddha, man's emancipation depends on his own realization of truth, and not on the benevolent grace of a god or any external power as a reward for his obedient good behavior. Now, your own consciousness, it'd be completely unjust for a god to look at an unrepentant person with bad consciousness, bad deeds, and treat them exactly the same as those who have went to the effort to, have their scales tip in the right direction. So only you can have your scales tip in the right direction. The Buddha once visited a small town called Kesaputta in the kingdom of Kosala. The inhabitants of this town were known by the common name Kalama. When they heard that the Buddha was in their town, the Kalamas paid him a visit and told him, "Sir, there are some recluses and brahmanas who visit Kesaputta. They explain and illuminate only their own doctrines and despise, condemn, and spurn others' doctrines. Then come other recluses and brahmanas, and they too, in their turn, explain and illuminate only their own doctrines, and despise, condemn, and spurn others' doctrines. But for us, sir, we have always doubt and perplexity as to who among these venerable recluses and brahmanas spoke the truth, and who spoke falsehood." Then the Buddha gave them this advice, unique to the history of religions. "Yes, Kalamas, it is proper that you have doubt, that you have perplexity, for a doubt has arisen in a matter which is doubtful. Now look you, Kalamas, do not be led by reports or tradition or hearsay. Be ye not led by the authority of religious text, nor by mere logic or inference, nor by considering appearances, nor by the delight in speculative opinions, nor by seeming possibilities. Sangha means community, but in Buddhism this term means the community of Buddhist monks, which is the order of monks. Buddha, Dhamma, teachings, and Sangha are known as the Tisarana, three refuges, or Triratana, Triratna, triple gem. And we see the difference in some of this here between Pali and Sanskrit is not just Poly is a simplified thing where you kind of, like maybe you can have a speech impediment, and that would be what poly sounds like. There are a lot of examples where that's not the case. Nor by this idea. This is our teacher. But O Kalamas, when you know for yourself certain things are unwholesome, akusala, and wrong and bad, and give them up. And when you know for yourselves that certain things are wholesome, kusala, and good, and accept them and follow them. Now, that is the method that we all should look towards. Honestly, let's be real, most of what we have in life is belief. It is, passed on. We're not verifying it for ourselves. There's all these carbon dates and all this other stuff. I'm just, now honesty in the fields like that is a lot stronger than it was at some points. But you're taking it on belief. Your use of language, you're taking that on belief. So, but you certainly strive for faith and knowledge for yourselves. And it shouldn't be that, you find a teacher and it's like, well, a teacher said this and therefore I must accept it. You see the difference in the religious tradition. We have in Islam, Muhammad, not everything he spoke was on spiritual authority. He certainly had his own foods and stuff like this. And he was corrected about a plan by somebody because he thought that somebody says, well, let's situate ourselves by the well, such and such. It's like, well, yeah, let's do that. Because his his regular life, as we would call it, was imbibed with inspiration. But I'm going too far with my explanation. But the point is, people had their own ways, their own personality. But as far as what wasn't, they were certainly saying, hey, look into these things. The Quran actually lists all sorts of sciences and philosophies that you should probably employ when looking over the claim. The Buddha went even further. He told the bhikkhus that a disciple should examine even the Tathagata, Buddha himself, so that he, the disciple, might be fully convinced of the true value of the teacher whom he followed. According to the Buddha's teaching, doubt, vicikiccha, is one of the 5 hindrances. Nivarana, to the clear understanding of truth and to spiritual progress, or for that matter to any progress. Doubt, however, is not a sin because there is no articles of faith in Buddhism. In fact, there is no sin in Buddhism, as sin is to be understood in some religions. The root of all evil is ignorance, avidya, and false views. Vicca, ditte. It is an undeniable fact that as long as there is doubt, perplexity, wavering, no progress is possible. It's also equally undeniable there must be doubt as long as one does not understand or see clearly. But in order to progress further, it is absolutely necessary to get rid of doubt. To get rid of doubt, one has to see clearly. There is no point in saying that one should not doubt or one should believe. Just to say I believe does not mean that you understand and see. When a student works on a mathematical problem, he comes to a stage beyond which he does not know how to proceed, and where he is in doubt and perplexity. As long as he has this doubt, he cannot proceed. If he wants to proceed, he must resolve this doubt. And when there are ways of resolving that doubt, just to say I believe or I do not believe will certainly not solve the problem. To force oneself to believe and accept a thing without understanding it is political and not spiritual or intellectual. And, the typical Baptist thing is that you must really see yourself as being born again somehow and being rebaptized and being recalled to officially be a church member, and people forced to, their experiences aren't much, and a lot of overblown claims because people feel like they're forced to have this, grand conversion story are forced to actually feel something rather than saying, this seems like the best religion, so I'm going to follow this religion. The Buddha was always eager to dispel doubt. Even just a few minutes before his death, he requested his disciples several times to ask him if they ever had any doubts about his teaching, and not to feel sorry later that they could not clear these doubts. But the disciples were silent. What he said was then touching. If it is through respect to the teacher that you do not ask anything, let even one of you inform his friend. I let the one tell his friend so that the later may ask the question on the other's behalf. And the 5 hindrances are sensuous lust, ill will, physical and mental torpor, and languor, restlessness and worry, and doubt. And Muhammad on his deathbed too was just surrounded by his disciples, and on his farewell pilgrimage before he got sick, probably being poisoned, it sounded like, was that, well, I mean, there's reasons to think that he was poisoned and it wasn't just cancer from living in the area with high oil, although that's possible too. Because he was exposed to an area where, to go through it, they actually, everybody going through there had to touch the stuff. He had three guidances for the people who died. He wanted to make sure that he conveyed correctly, and people didn't have any reason to doubt, and final questions or statements, and that sort of thing could be made. Not only the freedom of thought, but also the tolerance allowed by the Buddha is astonishing to the student of the history of religions. Well, certainly the churches and stuff that were founded based on figures, tolerance and stuff, but the people behind them, yeah, it was, it's different when you look at the difference between church and religion. Watson Balanda, a prominent and wealthy householder named Upala, a well-known lay disciple of Nigantha Nataputta, Jaina Mahavira, was especially sent by Mahavira himself to meet the Buddha and defeat him in argument on certain points in the theory of karma, because the Buddha's views on the subject were different from those of Mahavira, quite contrary to the expectations. Upali, at the end of the discussion, was convinced that the views of the Buddha were right and those of his master were wrong, so he begged the Buddha to accept him as one of his lay disciples, Upasaka, but the Buddha asked him to reconsider and not to be in a hurry, for considering carefully is good for well-known men like you. When Upala expressed his desire again, the Buddha requested him to continue to respect and support his old religious teachers as he used to. In the 3rd century BCE, the Buddhist emperor Asoka of India, following this noble example of tolerance and understanding, honored and supported all other religions in his vast empire. One of his edicts carved on a rock, the original which one may even read today, the emperor declared, one should not honor only one's own religion and condemn the religions of others, but one should honor others' religions for this or that reason. So doing, one helps one's own religion to grow and renders service to the religions of others too. In acting otherwise, one digs the grave of one's own religion and also does harm to other religions. Whoever honors his own religion and condemns other religion does so indeed through the devotion to his own religion, thinking, I will glorify my own religion. But on the contrary, in so doing, he injures his own religion more gravely. So concord is good. Let all listen and be willing to listen to the doctrines professed by others. Now, you don't have to agree to what you consider wrong in one way or another. But you can certainly look at other paths and say, hey, there's good, there's truth, there's value. I can encourage that. None of this. For whosoever yet offended in one point, he is guilty of all. That's a horrible little verse there. Whoever shall keep the law and yet offend in one point, that's trying to make it say if you slipped up and said a bad word at one point, it's like you're a serial killer, rapist, because, okay. Mahavira, the founder of Jainism, was a contemporary of the Buddha and was probably a few years older than the Buddha. We should hear, the thing I just read was Rock Edict number 12. We should add here that the spirit of sympathetic understanding should be applied today, not only in the matter of religious doctrine, but elsewhere as well. The spirit of tolerance and understanding has been from the beginning one of the most cherished ideals of Buddhist culture and civilization. That is why there is not a single example of persecution or the shedding of a drop of blood in converting people to Buddhism or in its propagation during its long history of 2,500 years. Are you kidding me? After the Christians, the Buddhists do most of the terrorism and murder in today, and the forming of Buddhism in Tibet and some other areas required a lot of violent persecution, and still to this day, the Dalai Lama, he was over disciplined to ensure his belief and practice in Buddhism. The Dalai Lama himself went through persecution, not just, go to school, sort of thing. It was more than that. It's spread peacefully. Now, the Buddhism itself, I'm not going to say that about that. Some people say there's 19 schools of Buddhism. 18 that have been, 17 that have been lost, and like 3 or 4 or 5 that we have. So nobody seems to want to just list out the schools of thought, because it's like Mahavana, Vajrayana, Theravada. Why do we need to talk about the others? It's like, you didn't even mention Zen. Spread peacefully all over the continent of Asia, having more than 500 million adherents today. Violence in any form, under any pretext whatsoever, is absolutely against the teachings of the Buddha. The question has often been asked, is Buddhism a religion or a philosophy? It doesn't matter what you call it. Buddhism remains what it is. Whatever label you may put on it, the label is immaterial. Even the label Buddhism, which we give to the teachings of the Buddha, is of little importance. The name one gives it is inessential. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. The same way truth has no label. It is neither Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, or Muslim. Now, Muslim doesn't mean like the other ones do. Muslim, if the doctrine's not surrendering to God, then how can it be the way unless there is no God? It is not a monopoly of anybody. Sectarian labels are a hindrance to the independence to the independent understanding of truth, and they produce harmful prejudices in men's minds. This is true not only in intellectual and spiritual matters, but also in human relations. When, for instance, we meet a man, we do not look on him as a human being, but we put a label on him such as English, French, German, American, or Jew, and regard him with all the prejudices associated with that label in our mind. Yet he may be completely free from all those attributes which we have put on him. And, in recent decades, they've been referring, in my country, to people who have never been to Africa, neither were their parents or grandparents immigrants, as if they're, a different nationality because they're a little darker than other people. And on average, a quarter black, three-quarters white. Just call them white if they're mostly white. That'd be fair. Saying there's a different race because they're a smaller portion otherwise, but they're closer, they're mostly the same grouping as me. Well, they're mostly the same grouping as you. That's, there's not even really a separate culture. There are certain statistics that play out, but, let's be true about nationalities. If someone's African or Asian or European or American, we have that. But if you're not from the Americas or whatever country, or you're not a current resident such and such, let's not use these labels. Read the attitudes which we put on him. People are so fond of discriminative labels that they even go to the length of putting them on human qualities and emotions common to all. So they talk of different brands of charity, for example, a Buddhist charity or Christian charity, and look down upon other brands of charity. A charity cannot be sectarian. It is neither Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, or Muslim. While if it's a surrender or submission, obviously, charity can be called Muslim or Islamic or whatever, because those terms would work. But if it does have the intention of worshiping Jesus, or if it's ethnic, like a label like Hindu or Jew might put it, but good and truth go beyond the labels, is the whole point. The love of a mother for her child is neither Buddhist nor Christian. It is mother love. Human qualities and emotions like love, charity, compassion, tolerance, patience, friendship, desire, hatred, ill will, ignorance, conceit, etc. need no sectarian labels. They belong to no particular religions. To the seeker after truth, it is immaterial from where an idea comes. The source and development of an idea is a matter for the academic. Like the difference between Tibetan Buddhism and Bon. What started with Tibetan Buddhism? What was really from Bon, and what was from the path of Buddhism before you got Tibetan Buddhism? And what was the origin of Zen? Well, we're talking about Zen, not necessarily what happened in the process. In fact, to understand truth, it is not necessary to even know whether the teaching comes from the Buddha or from anyone else. Well, if we're talking about a religion, it is important to distinguish between revelation, inspiration, and the scholarly, or the mystic, or the general mystic. But a realization of the truth is a realization of the truth. What is essential is seeing the thing, understanding it. There is an important story in the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 140, which illustrates this. The Buddha once spent a night at a potter's shed. In the same shed, there was a young recluse who had arrived there earlier. They did not know each other. The Buddha observed the recluse and thought to himself, "Pleasant are the ways of this young man. It would be good if I should ask about him." So the Buddha asked him, "O Bhikkhu, in whose name have you left home? Or who is your master? Or whose doctrine do you like?" "O friend," answered the young man, "there is the recluse, Gautama, a Sakyan Skyan, who left the Sakya family to become a recluse. There is high repute abroad of him, and he is Arahant, a fully enlightened one. In the name of that blessed one, I have become a recluse. He is my master, and I like his doctrine. Where is that blessed one, the Arahant, the fully enlightened one, live at the present time? In the countries to the north, friend, there is a city called Savatthi. It is there that the blessed one, the Arahant, fully enlightened one, is now living. Have you ever seen him, that blessed one? Would you recognize him if you saw him?" "I've never seen that blessed one, nor shall I recognize him if I saw him." The Buddha realized that it was in his name that this unknown young man had left home and become a recluse. Without divulging his own identity, he said, "O Bhikkhu, I will teach you the doctrine. Listen and pay attention. I will speak." "Very well, friend," said the young man in assent. Then the Buddha delivered to this young man a most remarkable discourse explaining truth, the gift of which is given later. It was only at the end of this discourse that the young recluse, whose name was Bukasati, realized that the person who spoke to him was the Buddha himself, so he got up and went before the Buddha, bowed down at the feet of the master, and apologized to him for calling him friend unknowingly. Then he begged the Buddha to ordain him admitted to the order of the Sangha. The Buddha asked him whether he had the alms bowl and the robes ready. A bhikkhu must have 3 robes and the alms bowl for begging food. When Bukasati replied in the negative, the Buddha said that the Tathagatas would not ordain a person unless the alms bowl and the robes were ready. So Bukasati went out in search of an alms bowl and robes, but was unfortunately savaged by a cow and died. And when the sad news reached the Buddha, he announced that Bukasati was a man who had already seen the truth and attained the ultimate stage in realization of nirvana, and that he was born in a realm where he would become an arahant and finally pass away, never to return to this world again. And in India, potters' sheds are spacious and quiet. Reference is made in the Pali text to ascetics and recluses, as well as the Buddha himself spending a night in a potter's shed during their wanderings. It is interesting to know here that the Buddha addresses this recluse as bhikkhu, which term is used for Buddhist monks. In the sequel, it will be seen that he was not a bhikkhu, but not a member of the order of the Sangha, but he asked the Buddha to admit him into the order. Perhaps in the days of the Buddha, the term bhikkhu was used at times for other ascetics indiscriminately, or that the Buddha was not very strict in the use of the term. Bhikkhu means mendicant, one who begs for food, and perhaps it was here that in its literal and original sense. But today the term bhikkhu is used only for Buddhist monks, especially in Theravada countries like Ceylon, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, and in Chittagong. The term is avusu, which means friend. It is a respectful term of address among equals, but disciples never use this term in addressing the Buddha. Instead, they use the term Bhante, which approximately means sir or lord. At the time of the Buddha, the members of this order of monks, Sangha, addressed one another as avuso, friend. But before the death of the Buddha, instructed younger monks to address their elders as Bhante, sir, or Ayasma, venerable, but elders should address the younger members by the name avuso, friend. This practice continues up to the present day in the Sangha. It is well known that cows in India roam